So, without further ado, our lovely speaker this afternoon is going to talk about voter suppression. Vivian, I'll turn it over to you. Vivian Harte.
Thank you. Okay, the film master is telling me where to go. Okay, am I in a good place now?
If you could be this much more to your left.
This much more?
That shows.
All right.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, are you happy now?
Not really, but
He's not happy yet. My name is Vivian Harte. I am so pleased to be with the Green Valley Democrats. I am the second vice chair of the Pima County Democratic Party, and I have a story to tell you about the Green Valley Democrats that maybe somebody here remembers. Raise your hand after I tell the story. In 2005 and 2006, I worked for the Pima County Democratic Party. My job was the outreach director, and I helped all the clubs, all the LDs, all the committees, whatever they requested. My job was to help them from headquarters, to be support for them. Well, I had a couple people come to me from the Green Valley Democrats, and they said to me, you know, Vivian, there are so many Republicans in Green Valley. What happens is when our members come to the door of our office, they go like this, knock, 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 because they don't want anyone to know that they're Democrats. Now, this was almost 20 years ago. And they said, we have no plan on what to do as the Green Valley Democrats. I said, I'll tell you what, I will come and do a process with you and help you with that. And they said, great. Does anybody remember that here? Was anyone? Okay, well, I'll tell you what happened. So the process I did was one that I had done before for other groups, and also I had done them originally as a participant. I had Post-it notes, and I said, what I want you to do is write down as many ideas on what you would like to see the Green Valley Democrats do in the next year. One idea per Post-it note. And people writing. And then we put all the Post-it notes on the board, huge board, with no organization at all. And then I said, okay, what goes with what? And they said, well, this one goes with that, and this goes with that, and this goes with that. We ended up with 5 columns of things that this group of people wanted to do within the next year. And then I said, okay, now who wants to be the chair of each one of these different groups? So I got 5 different people who would be the chair. And I said, and who wants to be on the committee of each one of these? And so what they ended up with was the tasks to do and the people to do them. And that's when the Green Valley Democrats really started taking off. And I was so glad to be able to be a part of that and to launch further the Green Valley Democrats. So I'm really pleased to be back with you. Thank you. Thank you. So you might know that a lot of Republican states are working very, very hard to suppress the vote. Now, who can tell me who they're trying to suppress? Democrats, exactly. That's exactly right. So, what I am going to be showing you today are a number of different ways that Republicans have been suppressing the vote, but also a number of ways that mainly Democrats and some Republicans have been expanding the vote. And I get all this from the Brennan Center for Justice. Who's heard of the Brennan Center for Justice? Yes, exactly. So they come up every so often with, and this is what the states are doing, and this is what the states are doing. So what you're going to see in the majority of this presentation is what they have reported. Next slide. So the platform of the Pima County Democratic Party says, we strongly encourage each citizen's involvement in the democratic process And we work to guarantee fair, transparent, and credible electoral processes. This is what Democrats stand for. Next. Who can tell me what is going on here?
Voter suppression.
Exactly, it is very much voter suppression. Can anyone tell me the year and who's involved?
65.
65. 65.
Mississippi.
Where? You're close. Close to Mississippi.
Alabama.
Selma, Alabama. At the bridge that was named for a slave owner. And what was exactly the Pettus Bridge?
Edmund.
Edmund Pettus Bridge. And what was happening on that bridge that day?
March.
Yes, they were marching. They had to march across the bridge because they wanted to go to Montgomery, Alabama, where their governor, who just loved black people, George Wallace, was seated. And they wanted to get to Montgomery. But they could only get to Montgomery over this bridge. On the other side of the bridge are state and county police on horseback and on foot. And when they started to go across the bridge, they got beaten up. And this is what people were seeing in their TV sets in black and white in 1965. That shook up the country. And the country was so shaken up that a week and a half later, the Voting Rights Act was introduced into Congress. It passed. Next. So the Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965. And you see Martin Luther King Jr. right next to LBJ when he's signing the bill. And the main thing about that bill was that Section 5 said, there we go, see, there they are. Anyway, Section 5 said that states had to go through the Department of Justice if they wanted to change their voting laws. So our wonderful Supreme Court in 2013 said, don't have to worry about that. No states are ever going to discriminate against black people again. We know that. And of course, the day after they made that announcement and passed and said that, North Carolina went to work. And a number of other states went to work to suppress the vote of black people. So, but this was not unusual. Next, please. In the mid-1800s, literacy tests for Catholic immigrants and for working class people in New York City and Boston also tried to suppress the vote. And the reason why we have a secret ballot today is to keep people who couldn't read from voting. So it's really not anything new, but it has a long history in the United States. Next, please. So one of the ways that votes are suppressed is requiring a voter ID. Now, who has a voter ID? Who has an ID card in order to vote? Okay. Driver's license, state card with your picture on it, tribal card, they're all different ways. And in fact, Arizona is one of the most liberal, believe it or not, ways to vote with what you show in order to vote. You can do things like your car registration and the utility bill and things like that to show who you are and where you live. Next. So here's the history of the requirement of voter ID. It didn't start until 1950. In South Carolina, no photo was required. Next. Two decades later, it took for the second state to require an ID, and that's Hawaii. Next. And a year later, it was Texas. Next. Florida. Next. Alaska. Next. By the year 2000, 14 states had a voter ID requirement. And Georgia and Indiana had a strict voter ID requirement. Who can tell me what that is?
Registration.
Well, it's that you have to have exactly the kind of ID that they require. If you do not, they will allow you to vote with a provisional ballot. And then you come back in a certain amount of time. They give you a number of days to come back and show them your ID.
So what was required before a voter ID was required?
Nothing.
I just walk in and say hi?
You walk in and you say, this is who I am.
Okay.
Remember they had those books?
Yeah.
And they went through the books
Right.
and they marked your
Yeah.
name? Yeah.
So all I had to do was have a name that was on the
Yeah.
registered list.
Right, exactly, exactly.
Well, no, they check your signature.
Right.
Not only that, but when I came here from New Jersey, I had a license with no picture on it at all. In fact, I used to mail it in, and they, with money, and they would send me back my new license with no picture
No
on
picture,
it at all.
yeah.
I remember as a young person going to vote with my mother,
Yeah,
and of course, I don't remember whether she was required to do something, but I know there was something that had to happen in order for her to be able to vote.
right.
So why don't we let Vivian continue with her speech, and we'll have time for Q&A or comments afterwards. They're very good, but let's move on.
Okay. All right, next. And today there are over 35 states that require a voter ID in order to vote. Some kind of ID in order to vote. So what are the reasons for a voter ID? Well, the first one is to reduce the great amount of voter fraud that we have. Now, I'm telling you, that's what the Republicans say. So, and also to increase our trust in democracy. Next. But there's almost none. Almost none. I'm going to tell you about some studies that were done about voter fraud. Okay. There was a study done by a professor at Loyola, say that 5 times fast, law school, who found that out of 1 billion, with a B, votes that were cast in all American elections between 2000 and 2014, so that was in 14 years, there were a grand total of 31 known cases of impersonation fraud. In Kansas, next. In Kansas, the U.S. District Court found that between 1995 and 2013, which is 18 years, there were a grand total of 3 instances of non-citizens voting. In Texas, 2002 to 2015, there were 85 prosecutions for voter fraud with 42 million votes cast. Wisconsin, there was a 2011 task force that found sufficient evidence to charge a grand total of 20 people with fraudulent voting in the 2008 election with 3 million votes cast. And most of those were felons who were ineligible to vote. So I wanted to tell you, with the League of Women Voters, I went to a meeting. Well, it was, we were shown around the recorder's office and what they did and how they did it. And the recorder, F.N. Rodriguez, you all remember her,
Yeah.
F.N. Rodriguez, I asked her, so is there fraud in our elections? And she said, yes. Every single election there is fraud. She said, it's mainly 2 groups of people. One are felons who think they can vote and haven't been approved by a court. And second, and I listened closely to this one, old people who vote at home with an early ballot and then they forget. And then they go and they do a provisional ballot. And she said those are basically the only people who do fraud, and we don't prosecute them. So I just thought I'd let you know. That's what happens in Pima County. So all this fraud they're talking about on the Republican side is not accurate. In the studies that are done, it's not accurate. Now, how many court cases did Trump have in 2020?
63.
I think it was 61. And one, he actually won. And it was like about 30 votes. 30 votes was added to his total. All the other 60, they lost. Why? Because they didn't have the evidence of fraud. But they're trying to do it again, you know. They have got lots of court cases going now. They're going to do it right after the election, especially if he loses. If he doesn't lose, then they'll be quiet because we know there was no fraud then, huh? Okay. So the effects of voter ID, requiring a voter ID, is there's a drop in minority voting with African Americans, Hispanics, and Asian Americans. But what happens with white people? What's the difference with white people? Next. White turnout is the same. Well, that's why Republicans want required voter ID. That's why. Because they can see that the groups that vote more for Democrats have a harder time voting and getting that ID. Next. There's also a drop in student voting. Now, students now tend to vote 60 to 65% Democratic. And they don't want those people voting either. In fact, one of the things they have done is taken away any kind of registration on campuses, voter registration on campuses. They've taken away places to vote on campus. They have said that the ID card with a picture that the students get from a state university cannot be included as an ID. Those are the kinds of things that Republicans have done and are doing to make it harder for students to vote. Next. So what's the problem? How many of you have an ID with a picture? Okay. Did anybody have a problem getting an ID? Okay. So what's the problem? Okay. If you're a single mother and you're working 3 jobs, how easy is it to take off and go to DMV and wait for 2 or 3 hours in a line with 100 people in front of you? It's a little hard. What if you're spending all your money just on rent, utilities, and food, and one new outfit for your little girl before she goes to school, and you don't have that extra $25 to get an ID? What if the DMV is quite a ways from anywhere where you live or work? And I will tell you, Republicans have specifically taken out DMV offices from minority neighborhoods to make it harder for them to have a voter ID. Next. Some people don't have a birth certificate. People who are very old black people and very old people from the prairie didn't have birth certificates. And, you know, people who are in their 90s now, they didn't have a birth certificate. And what happens if your courthouse burned down? Before they digitized everything. So those are some reasons why it may be difficult to get an ID. So going back to fraud, I have some questions here though. Okay, who in this room, I don't even know if I need to ask this question, who votes in this room? Okay, all right. Who voted in 2 states for the same election? Or know someone who did? Nobody? Okay, we're looking at voter fraud again. Who voted for dead people as well as yourself? Well, you'd like to. Okay, who voted while you were here illegally? Wow, you all better get on the stick here. We need more Democratic votes. No, I'm joking. Okay, next. Here are other ways to suppress the vote or expand the vote, and these are the kinds of things I'll be showing you shortly. Early voting days. Now, you know that the Republicans realize that Democrats do more early voting and mail-in voting, so you will see with the voter suppression, that's a lot of what they are doing in order to make it harder for Democrats to vote. Okay, so early voting days, hours and locations. Who can tell me what Souls to the Polls is?
Church. Black churches going to the polls after church.
Exactly, on the Sunday before Election Day, exactly. So that was made illegal in certain states before they went back to the courts and said, no, you can't stop them from doing that. That's good. Okay, registering on election day, mail-in ballots, drop boxes, voter lists, and felon enfranchisement. Next. So, voter suppression affects minorities the most with, like I said, required voter IDs. Next. Cutting mail-in ballots and early voting leads to longer lines at the polls. Now, who remembers the year 2000, the election in 2000 with Gore and Bush in Florida? What was going on? The hanging chads. What was also going on was the Republican Secretary of State made the decision to have lots of voting machines in the white areas and just a few voting machines in the minority areas. So longer lines, people had to go back to work, people got tired of being in a 6-hour line, they got tired, they got worn out, they had to go home, take care of their kids, whatever it was. And that was part of the reason why Al Gore was not our president, and it changed the history of the United States. Next. Polling place consolidation leads to longer lines at the polls also. Now it's going to be interesting this year because what's happening is in 2020 we had the pandemic and a lot of people wanted to vote by mail because they were afraid of standing in line, and so a lot of people asked for mail-in ballots. That this year they're going to go on election day. The mail-in ballots are not as popular this year. And that makes sense because people aren't so afraid of getting COVID. And so, but it's interesting, if they cut the polling places, then it's going to be harder on election day if they base it on how many people voted in 2020. Now, who can tell me in Arizona what percentage of people vote early or vote by mail, let's say?
60%. 60.
You are right, 80%. Good. 75 to 80% of our population in the state vote by mail. Yeah. Okay. How many of you vote by mail? Well, there you go. See? All right. All right, next. Okay, so I'm going to show you the states and what they are doing to suppress the vote since the 2020 election. This is only since the 2020 election. And what I'm going to show you are a number of ways that these states are suppressing the vote with pictures of the states. And I don't want to go through them very quickly because you'll never understand what states they are. So I will pause in between each one so that you can have a moment to look at the different states. And now, how many of you were born and raised in Green Valley or Tucson? Okay, one person. Everybody else is from somewhere else. So you might look for your own state on here. All right, next. Okay, tighten or impose voter ID requirements for mail-in ballots. And you are going to notice almost all these states, in fact, I think all of them, pretty much are Republican states. Next. Limit early voting days or hours. They want to make it harder for Democrats to vote. Next. Eliminate election day registration. Montana. Used to be you could register on election day, but no more. Next. Make it more difficult for groups to register voters. And this has had, since I've been in the League of Women Voters, I know that this has affected them in these states because they can get prosecuted for what they're doing to register voters that they used to be able to do easily. Who can tell me other groups in our area who register voters? Other than the Democratic Party. League of Women Voters, La Familia Vota is another group.
Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift. Yeah, she gets around, doesn't she? Very good.
Voting in all her contests, registered voters.
That's good, that's good. All right, next. Reduce polling place locations or hours. Remember, longer lines, less people are going to vote. Next. Increase the number of voters per precinct, which will make also longer lines if people have to vote only in their precinct. Now, what happened in Pima County I think it was the last time we voted? that made a difference? Had to do with polling places.
They cut down the number.
You could go wherever.
Yes, we have voting centers now, exactly. That means you can go anywhere in Pima County to vote, at any voting center. It used to be, remember, you only had to go to the one near your house?
Right.
And if you worked on the other side of Tucson, and then you had to drive all the way back to try and get there after work, well, what if you had to work overtime and oh my goodness. Anyway, so now you can go anywhere in Pima County to vote, which is nice. That's voter access and expansion. Okay, next. Bars, snacks, and water to voters waiting in line. Boy, you really want to do that, don't you? Want them to be hungry and thirsty with a long, long line. Now, Georgia used to be on this slide, but their Supreme Court said, no, we're not going to go that far. Okay, next. Tighten or impose voter ID requirements for in-person voting, making it harder to vote. Next. Shorten the window to apply for a mail-in ballot, making it harder to get a mail-in ballot. If those Democrats are going to vote by mail, we're going to make it harder. Next. Shorten the deadline to deliver your mail-in ballot. You have less days that you can get it in. By the way, let me ask you this. Y'all who vote by mail, which is almost everyone, how long before the date of the election must you put it in the mail? By the 29th, which is 1 week before the election.
Right.
Now, of course, if you don't make that, you can always drop it off at one of the early voting places or on election day at any of the voting places. Next. Making it harder to remain on the mail-in ballot list. You see our great state of Arizona. What happened with that?
Pebble disappeared.
Pebble disappeared. Now it's Pebble. Pebble is so easy to say. And in fact, in the VAN, the Voter Activation Network, it's still Pebble. Okay, so what's that new rule that our wonderful legislature, Republican legislature, passed? Yes, go ahead.
If you haven't voted in the last 2 elections, you're off the permanent Pebble.
Right, you're off the mail-in ballot list.
Right.
But they are required to send you a letter, and you can sign up again if you want. So it's not like you're off forever. All right, next. Eliminate or limit sending mail-in ballot applications, this is the applications, to voters who do not specifically request them. So what happened in 2020 was with the pandemic, secretaries of state were sending out applications for people to vote by mail without anybody asking for them. Eliminate or limit sending the ballots themselves, the mail-in ballots themselves, to people who don't request them. Next. As you can see, Florida's in a lot of these. DeSantis is doing a great job. Okay, restrict assistance in returning a voter's mail-in ballot. Now, I know in Arizona, we have laws against that. That you can take your family members, but that's about it. You can't take your neighbors or anything like that. And that was mainly, that was before 2020 for Arizona. That's why it's not on this slide. And the problem with that, especially in the tribal areas, is they are so far from the post office that they would gather all their neighbors' ballots and take them to the post office, but they are not allowed to do that anymore. Next. Limit the number, location, or availability of drop boxes. In some states, they say even with a city with 1 million people, they can have 1 drop box. 1. Okay, they're not trying to make it easy. Again, all Republican states. Next. Impose stricter signature requirements for mail-in ballots. And so that means it's easier to throw out ballots that don't have it exactly the way they say. Next. Verify applicants' citizenship status. This was a big thing that went up to the Supreme Court for Arizona. And they said, yes, the state can require people to show their citizenship status. Next. Expand voter purges or risk faulty voter purges. Now, let me tell you why this is important. People with Hispanic names and Asian American names, there are less names with those two cultures, less last names than with white people or black people. And so, it's easier to have someone with the same name who's born on the same date with those two groups. And of course, they vote more Democratic. And so it's when they're purging the rolls, they're not taking that into consideration. And so it's very, very easy for them to get rid of Democrats. Make it a criminal offense for election officials to solicit, accept, or use private funding for election-related expenses. Now what happens is, if a state doesn't want to give the counties enough money to have a good election, then how are they going to get enough money? Well, they're saying, no, you can't get it from private donations either. Tough luck. You're on your own. Next. Make it a criminal offense for, and this is Arizona, make it a criminal offense for an election official to fail to use new restrictive citizenship verification requirements and inadvertently accept a non-citizen's voter registration, a criminal offense. Put them in prison. Next. That's why people are rushing to work for the recorder's office and the elections department. Okay. The king is Texas. So these are some of the things they have done in Texas since 2020. Next. They banned 24-hour voting. They banned drive-through voting. They ban officials from mailing unsolicited mail-in ballot applications. Next. They have new vote-by-mail ID mandates. They have to provide a driver's license number or the last 4 digits of their social security number 2 times, once on the application form, and once on an envelope for the ballot. Now, how many people forget that? But voters will be notified and can make corrections if the ballot is submitted before Election Day. Monthly voter roll checks remove people who are not citizens when they get or renew their driver's license or ID. And that's fine, except what I just mentioned too. Okay, go ahead. Empowers partisan poll watchers. Uh-oh. Free movement at polling places. And they can sue election officials. Suing election officials is getting really popular now, who get in their way. But they do have training, and they can be removed without warning if they break the law, which has to do with getting too close to election workers and things like that. Now, who has ever done any observing of the recorder's office or the elections department during an election? Okay, and what did you observe?
I'm trying to remember, it's been a while.
Okay, I saw a hand back here. Yes, what did you observe? Which one?
I don't remember.
Well, I remember because I've done it most recently. And what happens is, I have never observed the recorder's office, but people do observe their doing the signature verification. What I observed was the elections department, and I'll just tell you what it looks like. It's a huge, huge room, and in the back are a bunch of people with machines, and the rest of the room are people sitting at tables, about as big as this table here. There are 2 people at each table. They must be a different party, and so they have, blue wristbands for Democrats, red for Republicans, and they have black for anybody who's not either of those. So they have to have 2 different parties represented. And what they do is they're opening the envelopes that the mail-in ballots come in. They flatten them out, and they look at each one to see if it can go through the machine. If it's got coffee on it, if the dog has, ripped it open or something, or it's got big X's through it or something like that, it's put aside. And so only the votes, the ballots that the machine can read actually go to the machines to read them, which is in another room over there. The ballots that are spoiled, they call them spoiled, go to the people in the back. And there are two people again of two different parties that are in front of a machine. And one person says, okay, for this race, this person, for this race, this person, for this ballot proposition, yes or no, or whatever. And they read it to the other person, and they're inputting it into the machine. And then the person who put it into the machine reads it back to the other person to make sure they look at the ballot. And they're reading it back to make sure the other person agrees. Now, as observers, we are not allowed to talk to anybody except one person, and that's the person in charge. One time I saw somebody at one of those machines entering data votes without the other person being there. So I went to the person in charge. I said, I want you to notice that. She went right up to that person and said, you must stop. They are not allowed to do any of their work unless both of them are there. So it's a good system, very good system. We also have auditing. How many of you have ever been part of the audit? Okay, the Saturday after the election, we have a bunch of people in a room, and everybody gets this big container, and it's either from a polling place or mail-in ballots. And beforehand, the heads of all the parties, there's 4 parties in Pima County. Who are the 4? Democrat, Republican, Green,
and Libertarian.
Libertarian, exactly. So those 4 people, the chairs of those parties, get together. They pick out of a hat which elections, which ballot propositions are going to be looked at. And the people at the table, then, they have a list of each one. And it's about, 5, 6 different ones. And what we're doing is we are testing the machines. So there's a person from the recorder's or elections department with a black apron on. I mean, I have a blue apron on. Someone else has a green one. Someone else has a red one. And again, you have to have at least 2 parties represented at each table. And the person from the elections department has the number that each person, of the votes that each person got for each election that is being looked at, that the machine said. And you have to keep counting and counting, and sometimes and counting until you reach that number. Although, a couple times we've been one off. But anyway, I want to let you know that happens in order to audit the ballots to make sure the votes are accurate from the machine. And our machines are very accurate. And poll watchers are allowed to be in election places, and they happen to be Republicans who are very angry. There could be some problems. There could be some problems. But Texas likes that. All right, new requirements for assisting voters except caregivers. They have to fill out a form with their name, address, and relationship to the voter, and they take an oath to limit their participation. They're not allowed to tell the person who to vote for. Next. Okay, let's look at the states that are expanding the vote since 2020 election. And you will notice not all, like Indiana and North Dakota, they're Republican states, but they have eased their voter ID requirements. But you will notice most are Democratic states. Next. Expand early voting opportunities. Even Louisiana.
Yes.
Next. Ease voter registration. Make it easier to register people. Next. Expand election day registration. Expand drop-off box access or locations. Make it easier for everyone to vote. Next. Provide greater access to voters with disabilities. I do want to point out, this is Virginia. This is Kentucky. They look similar, but
Yes.
they're different states.
Oh, okay.
Okay, provide greater access to voters with disabilities, and you'll see Arizona on there. Next. Restore voting rights to people with past convictions. Make it easier for people to vote who've been felons. Arizona's on there too. Next. Prohibit discrimination through State Voting Rights Act. That's Virginia. Next. Improve language accessibility. You may not know this, but Arizona was also under Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. And the main reason was because we had everything in English. So once we went under Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act it wasn't in 1965, but shortly after that, we had to put things in Spanish and Native American language.
Which one?
No, all.
Oh.
I think all, yeah. Next. Protect polling place access. Wonder why we need that now. Next. And this is a new one. Protect election workers from intimidation or interference. Even Republican states are noticing that. Next. Ease voting for people in jail. Improve voter list maintenance. Now, I have on there the Election Registration Information Center, and that's something that states can join or not join, and it shares information having to do with people who have moved, who have died, or duplicates of people who are registered in 2 different states. And what's happening is Republican states are leaving it, and Democratic states are going into it more. So it's kind of interesting. And be sure to vote. Have your friends vote, your family vote, everyone you know vote. From the whole ballot, top to bottom to top. Vote. All right. Now, thank you. Thank you very much. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
What do you think is going to happen in the states that were hit by the hurricane that are normally red states?
Now that's a good question. I just heard that, I think it was the North Carolina Supreme Court just said they're not going to be able to change the polling places now. Is that accurate? I think so. I think so. Well, that's what I'm saying. They may have to rebuild them or put up a tent or something. And I think you would think it depends on where it is. Maybe in Asheville, North Carolina, they don't want to have any voting places because that's a Democratic stronghold of the state. And that area got hurt more than any place else in the state. And maybe that's why the Supreme Court said that. So,
But a lot of the rural people in that state are Republicans.
that's right. That's right. Exactly. So there are 2 divides in our country. One is rural-urban. Well, 3 divides. Rural-urban, educated, non-college educated, and women and men. Those are the 3 groupings that are taking place in our country with the different parties. So I don't know the answer to that. I would hope that this is my League of Women Voters hat, would say, I would hope that they would have polling places up and running or get other places or whatever they need to do to encourage people to vote.
Mail-in voting is probably not going to happen.
Yeah, maybe not, because they lost their ballots in the flood. Yeah. Yes. Exactly. They lost their roads. They can't even get to the people in some areas. Yes, sir.
One the thing about the why we went to secret ballots, I had not heard that it was to prevent those who are illiterate from voting. But I remember at one point a program on the history of the development of unions in this country. One of the reasons for the pressure to go to secret ballots was because employers were marching their employees to the polls where they are then called by name and they give their vote because the employers wanted to make sure that their employees voted the right way.
Right. Right.
So that was another reason.
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you, ma'am. Yes, sir.
I have a question. We know that Trump invents the idea that there's voter fraud. how many Republicans are caught?
None. If you noticed, he was saying that he, he lost the election because of voter fraud, but he never said all these Republicans who won, they should step out of office because there was voter fraud for them too.
But
Remember that?
they've caught them, haven't they? Some Republicans have been caught.
Well, Republicans have been caught doing
Yeah.
voter fraud,
Yeah,
actually,
yeah.
more than Democrats.
Okay, we're running out of time, but one or two more questions.
Well, I was just wondering, I have a little frustration with the Democrats. I'm wondering why we're not getting in front of the whole voter fraud issue. Like by giving those statistics that you gave at the very beginning about how absolutely rare it is that this happens. Maybe running a blank screen for a commercial and just, hammering it home that it is just exceptionally rare.
Right. That would be a good idea. That's a good idea.
One more. Okay, Kate.
I just want to talk about in the voter expansion, it is a law that employers are supposed to give the employees the time off to go and vote. I mean, it's a law.
Yes.
So it seems to me that maybe making Election Day a national
Holiday would be good. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Why not have it on a Saturday or
Yeah,
Sunday?
exactly. So, does that ever happen to you? Something goes in your mind?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
It's the winter.
What's happening now is certain female candidates on the Democratic side are saying, ladies, your husband isn't going to know how you vote once you get into that polling place. Okay, I want to end with a song about voting, and then we're done. I do want to mention, I wrote a book. It's called The 80-Year Cycle of Transformation, Why Liberals Are Winning. And it's a history book as well as a sociology book. I'm a sociologist, and a political book. And it talks about what's going on in our society today. It was published in February of this year. So talk to me if you're interested. But I always end with a little song about voting that I wrote in 1984 when I was 2 years old. Okay, it goes like this. But I updated it. I don't sing about 1984. Okay, it goes like this. In 2024, we need to do more. It's time to come to the aid of America. In 2024, I implore, it's time to come to the aid of America. Go to the polls and cast your vote. Time to have your say. Let your voice be heard now. We can make such a beautiful way. We can create such a beautiful day. In 2024, hear us roar. It's time to come to the aid of America. In 2024, don't ignore, it's time to come to the aid of America. We need your vote. We need it right now to help democracy. Vote for the people you like the best because you are the key to keep America free. In 2024, hear us roar. It's time to come to the aid of America. In 2024, don't ignore, it's time to come to the aid. Come to the aid. Come to the aid of America. Thank you. Now, I will tell you, if you like that song, you can go on my YouTube channel, Vivian Harte. It's H-A-R-T-E. There's an E at the end. It's on my YouTube channel. You can download it. You can send the link to your family and friends. Let's get voting.